All right, so what I really want to talk about today is the custom bike frame I'm currently working on. And the design of this frame was inspired by the bike I got to ride that John Fitzgerald made. It's a custom bike he built. And he let me test ride that while we were down in Marin County. Oh wow, the wind is strong here. Hopefully this audio is coming in okay. Anyway, the bike he let me test ride was one that he custom made, and he built it around a 650B by 55 millimeter wide tire, or basically a 2 1/4 inch tire. And that's kind of where I want to go with my next bike. 2.25 to 2.3 inch wide tires. But I haven't completely decided yet on a couple things. I haven't totally decided on the tire diameter, whether I'm going to go with the 650B or the 700C. There's a couple of reasons why I haven't decided on it, is because I'm also designing a bike frame for Miss Cools that's going to be a similar bike to this one. And I haven't decided if I should, because her frame will be smaller, I haven't decided if we should both have the same size wheels or not. I mean, we should have the same size wheels. But if I go with a 700C, then that's going to really change the design of her bike. And I don't know if it's going to handle and ride exactly the same as mine will. So that's where I'm kind of working on that still. So that's one of the big decisions I have to make. And the other big decision is just going to be the tubing. I like this bike I'm riding right now. This is a standard diameter tubing. It's really flexy. It's very comfortable, and it's very springy. You know, you feel it when you're hitting some of the rougher bumps. So the idea of the bike is going to be built around mixed terrain or off-road, mostly off-road touring, bike packing, that sort of thing. That's what I want to optimize it for. I have other bikes, obviously, so I'm not trying to build a one bike does it all. I'm really wanting to build this to be a very specific tool for a very specific kind of ride. And that is basically mostly off-road bike touring / bike packing. All right, so here is my custom bike. This is the 700C version. And right now I've got some of the geometry turned on so we can go through this. And I have the 650B version of the bike as well. I'm going to show you that, and we're going to talk about the differences and some of the pros and cons of each of the different designs and why I might choose one over the other. So first of all, overall, what I'm trying to get to here is a bike that has a very low or a very high stack, a very low bar, saddle to handlebar drop. And that would be, if you want to imagine this, I'm going to zoom this in a little bit. So if you imagine the distance from the top of the saddle to the top of the handlebars, I'm trying to limit that as much as possible without creating a bike that has a lot of, or limited standover height. So that is, when your legs are standing over the bar here, you're not, smashing your crotch into the bar when you step down off the bike. Now this is a 58 centimeter seat tube. I'll turn off the color so you can see all the dimensions a little bit better. This is a 58 centimeter seat tube, which is the same as on my other custom bike, but this is a 700C wheel size. So the standover on this bike is a little bit higher. I've also got a slight up slope here on the top tube. So even though the seat tube now is the same length as my current bike, I also have a slight increase in the top tube slope, which brings the head tube, top tube joint up a little bit higher, which helps to reduce that saddle to handlebar drop, which is what I'm trying to go for. But I am really trying to balance the standover height with the comfort overall on the bike. And as you can tell here, some of the geometry of this bike is really interesting. So let's go through it. So this is a 700C bike. We've got a 622 millimeter diameter rim, and the outside diameter of the tire is 740 millimeters. And you may be wondering, where did that come from? This is an assumed 2¼ inch wide 700C mountain bike tire with the knobs. So I've accounted for the knob height. I got this number, I measured my Schwalbe Racing Ralph tires on my mountain bike. They are 2¼ 700C, and they came out to 740 millimeters overall diameter. And so with the seat tube angle at 73.5, I have a chainstay of 450 millimeters and a 90 millimeter bottom bracket drop. I end up with 13 millimeters of clearance between the seat tube and the tire. And that's also a function of the diameter of the seat tube. This is a 28.6 millimeter diameter seat tube, which is a standard diameter seat tube. Just to kind of go into the tubing specs here a little bit, the down tube's oversized. This is 31/8 is what that is. 1.1 down tube. No, I'm sorry, 1¼ down tube, 1.1 top tube. I always get that mixed up, but it's 1¼ which is 31.8 millimeters, and then the top tube's 28.6, which is 1.1. And the handlebars, we're gonna stick to more modern bars with a shallow drop and a little bit of flare, a little bit of gravel flare here. And I don't know what the width is gonna be. I haven't decided, but it's probably gonna be pretty narrow. We're gonna have brake lever shifters on this bike. We are not going with down tube shifters for this one. I wanna go with everything up on the handlebars this time. I'm not getting rid of my down tube shifter bike, so don't worry. I'm keeping it. I just, for this bike and for what I wanna use it for, it's not gonna get used a lot, but when I do use it, I wanna go with brake lever shifters. Mechanical, not doing electronic shifting. I will not have down tube shifter bosses on this frame at all. It'll just be it'll be shifter stops, shifter cable stops. On the head tube angle, I am trying to get a very medium, like middle of the road trail, which as you can see here is 55 millimeters. In order to do that, I ended up with a 65 millimeter fork offset, and I went with a 71.5 degree head tube angle. I haven't completely, this is not for sure solid yet. We may change this. I haven't had a chance to talk to John Fitzgerald yet to find out if he thinks this is a bad idea or not. But right now, this is kind of where I'm at, and I'm trying to keep the toe overlap from being a problem. I don't want a lot of toe overlap, but I'm okay with a little bit if I have to. And I don't want a lot of handlebar flop. I don't want to go with such a slack head tube that I end up with a lot of wheel flop. I don't want wheel flop and I don't want toe overlap, but I will do my best to try and keep the trail somewhere in the mid 50s, low 60s. So I don't want this to be a high trail bike and I don't want it to be a low trail bike. And it's got a really high stack and a fairly short reach actually. Let's pull up the reach here. Right now the top tube is 57 centimeters. So generally I ride between a 56 and a 57 centimeter frame. I haven't gone much longer than that. I have a short torso and a long legs. This is kind of how my body geometry works out. So for me, I usually have a shorter top tube and a longer seat tube. That's kind of how I end up. So this frame would be more like a traditional, I would say it would be it'll kind of ride like a 59 or a 60 centimeter frame. But with the top tube sloping down, it gives me a little bit more seat post exposed here. Okay, so that's it. That's the 700C bike. Let's switch over now to the 650B version, and let's take a look at that, and let's look at the differences between the two. Okay, so as you can see, I just switched it over, and you can almost, here, I'm gonna switch it back and forth again, actually. Let's switch it back and forth and just kind of watch and see if you can see what the differences are. Obviously the wheels are smaller, but tell me what else you notice, or think about what you notice as I switch this back and forth. Let's go back to the 700. Okay, so that's the 700C. Now here's the 650B. Now pay attention and just watch the screen as they switch, okay? All right. So hopefully what you can see is that the frame now and the bike is a little bit more compact, meaning it's got a little bit shorter wheelbase, okay? It's got a little bit shorter chain stays. The wheels are obviously smaller. The rear wheel is tucked a little bit more underneath the saddle. So watch that. I'm going to go back and turn on the 700C and watch the rear tire in relation to the saddle, and you will see how the tire is going to be further back. It's going to watch how the tire gets further behind the saddle as I switch it back to the 700C. See that? See how the center of the tire is further behind the axis of the seat post? Let's go back to the 650B. Watch that tire get tucked underneath. Okay? So what is that doing really is it's just shifting your center of gravity. When you have shorter chain stays and your seat is behind the tire or over the back tire, your center of gravity is further back. Probably the other benefit here is that the bike frame is a little bit smaller, and so it's more compact, and it's also a little bit lighter. But the wheel diameter and the size of the tires are also smaller, so they're also lighter. And that's going to save you overall, it's going to save you some weight. What do you give up when you do that? You tend to give up a couple things. One, you give up the extra, maybe the better rolling, rolling over larger obstacles with a bigger tire is a somewhat of an advantage that you're giving up. It's very minor. It's a very small difference, but there is a difference. You're also giving up the fact that 700C wheels and tires are more readily available. There's more tire companies manufacturing 700C tires, especially in the 2.25 to 2.3 inch wide tires. There's a lot of companies building XC tires in that size. There's some actual downhill tires. There's a lot of tire options in the 700C, even in the kind of in the gravel space as well. So you have a lot more options. The 650B though is starting to grow. That market is becoming more popular. So tire companies are starting to make more 650B tires, but there's not as many as there are in 700C. And the rims, there's not as many 650B rim options as there is in the 700C. Now, since I'm running rim brakes, I have very, very few options anyway when it comes to rim brakes. Even in the 700C market, there's just not a lot of 700C with a wide rim profile in the 700C rim brake market. Now, you might be wondering, okay, so why not just stick with 700C then? If okay, this bike's going to be a little bit lighter. It's going to look a little bit, the proportions are going to look a little bit funky to you for my size to get everything the way I want. So why not just go with 700C? So let's open up Miss Cool's bike. And the reason I'm thinking of going with 650B is because of Miss Cool's. So I've designed a bike for Miss Cool's that's a 650B, the same kind of bike. And the proportions of this bike just look perfect to me. She's got really big tires, a good bottom bracket drop or height, and just everything about this bike looks good to me. The chain stays are nice and short and tucked, still has a lot of tire clearance. She's got a good 52 millimeter trail, which is not high. It's not low, but it's not high. We got a 71 degree head tube angle. We don't have a ton of toe overlap. We were able to control that pretty well. So overall, I'm really happy. She's got a nice, comfortable reach and stack on this bike. She's got the triple on here. I mean, this bike is ready for long distance comfort over rough surfaces. We've got this 27.5 by 2.25 inch tires on here. Nice flexy fork. This thing is going to float over the gravel. Now, if I were to switch Miss Cool's onto a 700C version, here's what happens. And you tell me, what do you think? So there it is. As you can see, the head tube gets really short in order to keep everything the same. You end up with the saddle really far forward. The chain stays are really long. I think these are 450 millimeter chain stays. You know, you got a lot more toe overlap here with the pedals. This is a 165 crank, so it's still short, yet because of how big these tires are, this bike just looks out of proportion. So that's why I want to I want us to both have bikes where we can share parts. We can share tubes, we can share wheels. Things are more cross compatible if we have the same size wheels. And so I want us to have bikes that fit us well, are comfortable, give us a lot of room in the frame for frame bags and water bottles. And that's what these bikes do when you run 650B or 27.5. And that's kind of one of the decisions I have to make, is whether we should both stick to the same size wheels. I do think my bike looks okay. The geometry is a little, the proportions might not look perfect to a lot of you out there. But I think when it's built, it'll look pretty good. I still think the handlebar drop's a little excessive here for an all-day comfortable bike, which I definitely want to get straightened out. In fact, why did it go back to 185? What it should be is 195. Let's try that. Whoa. Oh yeah, and the seat too should be 58. There we go. Okay. So that's a nice big frame. It's got a lot of clearance for a big frame bag in there. I think this bike will be really comfortable all day. You can see now that the handlebar drop is not excessive. Here we've got 15 millimeters of steer tube above the top tube. So I'm really liking the way this is looking. I do think the 700C looks better in my size frame, but for those reasons I mentioned, I'm tempted to just stick with this. So anyway, that's the overview of the frame. What we're trying to achieve with these bikes is all-day comfortable bikepacking bikes with large triangles here so we can fit big frame bags in, water bottles, that sort of thing. We want rim brakes for their simplicity. We want steel frames with, mine's going to be oversized tubing. Miss Cool's is going to probably be standard tubing with the possibility of an oversized down tube. We want to run 2.25 to 2.3 inch wide tires that can fit knobby tires at that width, because we also want to have the option to buy tires from all kinds of tire brands out there, XC tires, gravel tires, slick tires. We want the option to run all of it. We want really low bottom brackets for that in the bike feel. We want to get inside these bikes. We want to ride them like all day. We might want to put clip-on aero bars and keep the stack really high. We're going to do the brake lever shifters on these bikes. We're going to run triple crank sets so that we can have narrow range rear cassettes, really cheap ones. Shimano 10-speed 11 to 32 or 11 to 34 are $50 or $60 for a cassette. And having a triple on the front just gives you all the gearing options you would ever need. And it's not that much of an extra weight. In fact, you save weight on the cassette, even though all you're doing is adding one chainring to the front. So it's a very optimal design drivetrain. You can pick your chain lines. The question we have for John in the design, when he goes to build this frame, is whether we can accommodate a triple with these wide tires and still keep a reasonably narrow Q factor on the cranks. That's something we're going to need to work out with John, see what he can do. We're going to have custom 1-inch threadless steers so that we can have the lightest possible stem and handlebar setup. We're trying to keep these bikes light without making them fragile. We want durable, but we don't want just to go hog wild on the weight and make these things tanks. We're trying to make them as light and efficient as possible. We're going to do standard diameter seat posts so we can get seat posts anywhere wherever we want, whatever we need. It's a standard diameter. And cantilever brakes. So fairly simple, very low maintenance, very durable, really reliable, especially when you're out in the middle of nowhere. You can trust your equipment, and that's what we want. So that's what we're working on. Please let me know what you guys think in the comments section. What do you think? Should we go 700C, 650B? Should we try to match wheel and tire sizes? Let me know. I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts. And thanks again. Hope this was a fun video. Have a nice day.